Hello everyone, and welcome to the fictional vortex. So we are back with an interesting movie on what if Naruto was an avatar of Ice God. But before we start, I just want to remind you to please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button if you enjoy my content. Let's start the story. Konoha date. October 10th location. Unknown. The death god looked down at the crying infant. He had found him. All the gods had played their role in the mortal plane. Kami had sent her champion, the Sage of Six Paths, Hagoromo Okushitake, to defeat the Jubi. The god of the sun Amaterasu had bestowed the humans with the power to summon her black flames, the god of storm. Susanoo had given man the ability to create a warrior that could defect any foe and lay waste to all who stood in its path. Each of the gods had played a role in the human world in some way or another, but he had not, waiting throughout time for the one to whom he would bestow his power upon, his avatar. And now, after many centuries of waiting, he had found him, but there lay a problem. For all his patience and excitement, he had forgotten one crucial glaring thing. He had no idea what power he would give his avatar. He thought about the power over death, but humans were not allowed to wield such power. They would crumble to their own desires and possibly see themselves as gods. Something that the real gods saw as an insult. For a mere mortal to dare claim he held equal if not greater power than themselves was something they did not like. For what seemed like an eternity, the death god hovered in the air atop the wailing infant, but still he could not find anything. By now the ninjas of the village were on their way looking for any survivors. A raindrop fell on the infant's head. The death god looked on queasily. Supreme power over water? No, that would not make him the warrior he needed. He wanted a warrior of great power, someone that would proudly present him as his avatar, one that would rival that of Kami's. He was tired of her gloating on and on about her own warrior. His eyes glowed. Ice. The answer came to him. Ice would be perfect, and besides, no god had thought about giving any mortal supreme control over ice before. He would the first. But ice was not as strong as metal. Crystal would suit him better, but crystal was not as malleable as ice. If only he could combine the two, to form an even more powerful, indestructible version of ice. His eyes widened a bit. That's it. A combination of crystal and ice. It would be both malleable, stronger than steel, indestructible, a power that would make him the perfect warrior. Another problem rose again. He had the idea of what power to give him, but how would he give the child the power? He could not simply form it out of thin air. He could, but there were rules against it. He needed a medium of some sort from where he could conjure up the power from. He looked at the crying child who was still naked, the seal on his stomach showing, the seal. If anyone could see the death god, they would have been shocked to him grinning like a madman. The Kyuubi within the child was a mass of concentrated chakra. Using that chakra he could give the child the power he needed. He slowly drew a complex seal on the wailing child's stomach, a seal that could not be seen by human eyes. He looked at the child. His work was done. Become a warrior worthy of my name. Rule over the realm of mortals like I do over death. Become king of All. With those parting words, the death god vanished back to the realm of the gods. Deep within the seal holding the Kyuubi was fighting to break free. It attacked its cage relentlessly in anger and rage. It couldn't be sealed. Not again. Not after being free only a while ago. It would not be caged like some rabid animal. It slammed the cage with all its might, and still nothing happened, not even a dent on the bars of the cage. It was about to attack again, when it felt something entering its new host's body. Its eyes widened when it recognized what the energy was. It was the same energy that had been used to rip it in half and seal it away. The bars of the cage started turning black as the energy passed through. Watching the dark cold chakras sip through the cage, Kyuubi, the strongest of all tailed beat, felt something it had only felt once in its existence: fear. It tried crawling away, but soon came to the edge of the seal. As the dark chakra approached closer and closer, the Kyuubi started sending its own chakra to overwhelm the dark chakra, but to its horror, the moment its chakra made contact with the foreign chakra, it was absorbed. The chakra kept on approaching till finally it reached its target and started draining its power. It tried fighting, but the power was too strong. Moments later, the Kyuubi was no more. When the Kyuubi was fully absorbed, all that remained in the middle of the seal was a large glowing red crystal. With the third Hokage, accompanied by several Anbu and Jonin, rushed towards where they had seen the fourth Hokage transport the Kyuubi to. He knew what Minato was planning to do. He was going to sacrifice himself to seal the Kyuubi within his newborn son. he had tried to reason with Minato to allow him to seal the Kyuubi after all he had long since passed his prime. He had lived his life whilst Minato on the other hand was still a young man, a husband and a father, but Minato had relented stating that it was the duty of the Hokage to lay his life for his village. He had tried to stop him but Minato had already vanished using his Hiraishin technique. His thought process was brought to a halt when an extremely large chakra wave washed over them, sending some of them hurling away. Hiruzen froze when he felt the fouled chakra of the Kyuubi once more. Has the Kyuubi broken free again? Hiruzen thought in alarm, his eyes staring intensely where the chakra was originating from. His eyes widened when he saw a large pillar of 3 chakras each in a different color, blue, black and red, spilling in the air as they fused together. They continued to rise till they reached the clouds and in a large explosion that lit up the entire night sky the pillar of chakra descended back into the ground, though this time the chakra was a dark shade of purple bordering black. When the chakra reached the ground they had all expected the large condensed chakra to explode in very a large explosion that would most likely destroy half the village. Considering how strong the chakra felt, that's what they had all expected, but to their surprise, when the chakra touched the ground all they saw was a flash of white blinding light that made them all cover their eyes. When the light died down Hiruzen took charge and ran as fast as his legs could carry him towards where the explosion of light had come from, his ninjas not far behind him. When they reached the site of the explosion what they saw broke all their hearts. There on the ground lay Minato Namikaze, blood leaking from his stomach, his chest not moving a little to his left. A woman with long red hair with blood sipping from her stomach much like the 4th Hokage. All the ninja present dropped their heads to mourn the death of their beloved hero and his wife. Hiruzen looked at the dead form of Minato and Kushina, his heart breaking at the sight. They did not deserve to die at such a young age, he thought sadly. A cry from his left caught all their attention. Curious Hiruzen walked towards the sound and what he found both made his smile and broke his heart. A newborn baby with a small patch of the purest white hair had ever laid on, 3 very light whisker marks on his cheeks, and the final thing that made Hiruzen instantly recognize who the child was a complex seal on the child's naked stomach. He picked the wailing child up and covered him with his robe to keep him warm. So you sealed it into your own child. He looked at the child in his arms. So young and already the world has done you a great injustice, he thought sadly, referring to the child losing his parents and having the Kyuubi sealed with him. The sky darkened and instead of rain fell from the sky. Snow? They all wondered surprised. It was spring and it rarely ever snowed in Fire Country, not even during winter. Hiruzen brought the child closer to him, afraid he might catch a disease from the freezing weather. Head back to the village, he told his Anbu. Why didn't you let me seal it instead, Minato? He looked around wondering where that strong chakra they had seen and felt had gone off to. He tried pinpointing its location by extending his sensory range, but the whole area was blanketed by the same chakra, making it impossible of him to sense anything. He would look into it later. For now there were many pressing matters that needed to be attended to. A lot of people had been killed when the Kyuubi went rampage in the middle of the village. The Hokage was dead and half the village was destroyed. The sky was dark, the air was cold, so cold you could actually see your breath, and lastly the Hidden Leaf village was covered in snow, yes snow. Fire Country, known for having the largest amount of, well, to put it simply, green, in the entire elemental nations. It was also known for its warm weather throughout the year. Rarely if ever it snowed, so one would find it mind-boggling to find Konoha buried under a heap of pure white snow. Hiruzen Sarutobi sighed sadly as he looked at the snowing village. He knew the cause of it, or rather the person who was unintentionally responsible for it. He approached his desk where his all-seeing crystal ball rested, adding a pit of chakra into it. The crystal ball showed him an all-familiar sight, one that broke his heart every time he saw it. Seating on a swing in a seemingly desolate playground, was a small boy no older than 4 years old. He had pure unkempt blinding white hair that seemed to glow when light reflected off it, and he wore a white short-sleeved shirt with a red spiral on the back and gray baggy shorts. Naruto Uzumaki, born 4 years ago and orphaned only a few hours after his birth, unwilling and unknown to all but him, the host of the Kyuubi that was sealed into him on the very night he was born, and lastly, the owner of a great power to control ice, truthfully. Harrison was baffled by the boy's uncontrollable power over ice. There were no recorded Uzumaki in history who were said to have such a power. The only other plausible explanation was that it was from his father's line. What other possible reason could there possibly be? He sighed sadly as he recalled how Naruto's life had been so far. When he was barely a year old, his powers had started to surface. At first it had started with Naruto's body temperature decreasing drastically to the point where the medic nin were afraid that he was going to freeze to death. By the time Naruto had turned 3, it had become impossible for anyone to touch him, and anyone who did was slowly turned into a statue of unbreakable ice. Another thing about Naruto's powers was that unlike ice, which when exposed to heat or left alone for a few hours would melt, the ice that his body produced would not melt. In fact, it was almost impossible to break. They had done several tests on the ice and to their sheer amazement had discovered that his wasn't just ordinary ice but rather it was crystal that was infused with ice, producing a new element that they had dubbed as crystal ice. The many possibilities of such a new, unknown, powerful bloodline had driven several council men and women power-hungry. The glint he had seen in a curtain warhawk's eyes did not put his mind at ease. But even with such a powerful ability, there was one thing that made the little boy's life one of loneliness and hatred from everyone but a few, a mistake which Harrison would forever live to regret. The boy was a Jinchuriki, and not just any Jinchuriki but the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi, and on the night that it had attacked and had been sealed within the boy, he had revealed it to the entire village. He had in all honesty been expecting the villagers to live up to the fourth's wish and see the boy as a hero and not the Kyuubi incarnate. Sadly, that was not so. He had overestimated the reactions and understanding of the people in the village, instead of the understanding and pity that he was expecting from everyone. Almost all the villagers were demanding that the young infant be killed, claiming that he was the Kyuubi in human form. The situation had escalated so badly so fast that Harrison was forced to deploy several Anbu units and Jonins to put the mob of angry, murderous villagers under control. In the end, it had taken almost an hour to get the crowd under control. Enraged at the behavior of his villagers to even suggest that he kill a child who had saved them all on that very day, a child whose parents had given up their lives to save him and the village. Harrison had set a law on that very day, a law stating that anyone who mentioned the Kyuubi being sealed within the boy or attempted to kill or harm him would be executed. Safe to say, nobody had made an attempt to harm the boy in any way, well, physically at least. Even though his law protected the young boy from being harmed or killed by the villagers, it did not stop the villagers from hurting the poor boy emotionally. Parents forbid their children from associating with him. Everyone treated him like a monster, sneering at the boy, ignoring his very existence, refusing to sell anything to him, be it clothes or food, and lastly, nobody ever touched the boy. Though the later B could not be blamed on anyone, as amazing as the boy's powers over ice were, they came with a great price. Anybody who touched his skin directly would be frozen. The last person who touched him, a kind young nurse who had tried to help the boy put on his clothes after having his usual checkup, the moment her hands touched the boy's skin she had screamed in shock and mind-crippling pain. Her screams only lasted for a few seconds before she was completely frozen. By the time the medic staff arrived in the room, the nurse was already dead, her body and all her internal organs frozen. Ever since that day, the villagers had become weary of the boy, their hatred and disdain now replaced with fear instead. As for Naruto, well, the boy had not been the same since then. He had started going out less and less, often spending up to a month in his room at the orphanage. Harrison had seen the dark rings around the boy's eyes many times after that incident. He had even become more distant and cold towards people and hardly ever said a word to anyone, not like there were many people that he could talk to. Standing up from his chair, the Hokage created a seal-less shadow clone, and with that he disappeared in a swirl of leaves, reappearing seconds later in the small playground where Naruto was. He slowly made his way towards the swing where the boy was. He sat by the boy's side and frowned when he noticed that Naruto had not even noticed that he was there. Clearing his throat to get Naruto's attention, the boy in question almost jumped in fright when he heard the sound. He hadn't even felt the person's presence come so close to him. Naruto looked to his side and saw the familiar sight of the old man wearing the large white robe and red funny-looking hat. "Oji-san?" Naruto muttered lowly, but the old man heard him nonetheless. "Naruto-kun, it has been a while, hasn't it?" What are you doing here all alone? The old man asked, trying to create a conversation with the boy that he had come to view and love like his grandson. He immediately regretted his question when he saw the dejected look of pain and loneliness flash through the boy's already emotionless ocean blue eyes. Naruto shifted his gaze from the old man and looked at the empty snow-filled playing ground. Run away, they always run away, he said sadly. The Hokage was not at all surprised when the dark sky blanketing the village became darker and snow started to freely fall again. Every time Naruto was feeling sad or depressed, it would always snow. Considering how the villagers treated him and how hard and lonely his life had been so far, he was seriously considered Leaf Village to the Hidden Snow Village. Putting on a small smile on his face, the Hokage stood up from his sit and went to stand behind the boy. How about I play with you instead? He suggested as he grabbed the ropes of the swing. Naruto slightly nodded his head in agreement, and so the Hokage spent the next hour or so playing with the small 4-year-old boy, chatting with him here and there. Unfortunately for them, the old man was a cage, and so his time to leisure about was barely there. Evident when Hiruzen stiffened when he received the memories of his shadow clone. He was needed back at the office. He stopped pushing the swing, getting a confused look from the boy, and gave him a small sad smile. I'm sorry my boy, but it seems our time has to be cut short. The boy frowned when he heard the news and got off the swing. It was almost time for him to return to the orphanage. The old man made to affectionately brush the boy's spiky white hair and stopped himself just a few inches from touching him. The last person to touch him did not end well. It's getting late, want me to walk you home? Hiruzen asked, referring to the orphanage as a home rather than an orphanage. Again Naruto nodded his head and started to walk out of the playground. Hiruzen looked at the spot where Naruto had been seated and frowned when he saw that it was now covered in a small thin layer of light blue ice. Naruto's powers were getting stronger and more uncontrollable as he grew older, considering how strong they already were. If the snow covering the village was any evidence, that was worrisome. The trip to the orphanage was rather short during the way there. Naruto had noticed the different looks that people were sending him. Instead of the usual cold glares and fearful glances that he was used to getting, almost everyone that they passed were bowing to the old man and giving him of all people a smile. Smiles that he recognized were being forced and clearly fake. Not that he cared about them or what they thought of him, he had long since learned that people generally did not like him, and for the life of him he couldn't figure out why. At first he had thought that it was because of his powers, but then he had seen other people spitting fire from their mouths and throwing large chunks of rocks at each other. They all had powers, and so did he, so they couldn't hate him for that, could they? He had even asked the kind old man who wore the funny-looking robes and visited him sometimes why everyone treated him the way they did. But the old man had shook his head sadly and told him that people were fearful of what they didn't understand, and that one day they would all learn from their mistakes and would accept him. Naruto was not convinced. Since then he had given up trying to figure out the reason for their hatred. It was not like he needed their acknowledgement and approval to live. As long as he had a roof over his head and food, as minuscule as it was, to eat, then that was all needed, not them, nor their approval. The Hokage dropped Naruto off at the orphanage, and just as he had appeared in the begging, he disappeared in a swirl of leaves. Naruto stared at the spot where the Hokage had been standing a second ago with wonderment in his rather dull eyes. He wondered if he could learn how to teleport like that. It would surely save him a lot of time, and he could avoid going through the village and their hateful, fearful glares. Muttering something lowly about asking the old man about it when he came to visit him later, Naruto knocked on the door of the orphanage and waited for a few seconds before he heard hushed movements inside the large, mansion-sized orphanage. The door cracked open, revealing behind it a rather large fat woman. She had short brown hair that was tied in a single bun, light green eyes, and was wearing a large red shirt with a black skirt that reached her knees. Her name was Akisha, one of the matrons at the orphanage, a person Naruto had come to dislike ever since he could remember. She would always shout at him at any given moment, regardless of whether he had done something wrong or not, and would always come up with ways to make his already miserable life that much more miserable. The woman looked up in confusion before her eyes landed on the small boy on her doorstep, and her eyes immediately hardened. "You're late," she said sharply, sneering at his very sight. Naruto did not respond. He had long since been used to this. Through the corner of his eye, Naruto could see some children playing. chasing each other around the trees, and without a doubt he was defiantly not late. He made no comment of his observation. The woman stared at him for a little while longer with a contemplative look on her face. After a few seconds of intense silence, she finally spoke. A few children moved into the house today. Unfortunately, there was not enough rooms to fit them all in, and so we had to give your room away. She seemed to be cheery as she spoke this, as though she had just done something that was so great it demanded a celebration. For the first since that day, Naruto's face showed emotion. A look of utter disbelief and confusion appeared on his face. But where will I stay?" Naruto asked hesitantly. The wind around them suddenly picked up. A small sinister grin appeared on the woman's face. She opened the door and reached behind it, taking a small green, torn-up bag that was full of what he could only guess his clothes. His clothes. She roughly threw the bag on the ground next to him. "Not my problem. Anywhere but here." With that, she shut the door in his face. For what seemed like ages, Naruto stood at the doorstep, frozen in shock, his small mind replaying what he had just been told over and over. He was only 4 years old, he had no family, no friends, and nearly everyone he met hated him. Where was he going to sleep? What would he eat? For the first time in his life, Naruto did something that he had only done when he was but an infant. He cried. Sitting down on the ground and hugging his feet, Naruto let the tears he had long since held back fall. He cursed his parents for dying and leaving him all alone in the world. He cursed the villagers for the way they treated him. And he cursed the matron of the orphanage for always ignoring him and for kicking him out. By now, unknown to the young distressed boy, a full-blown blizzard had appeared in the village. Everyone was running around trying to get to shelter. Shops stand were being blown away. Trees were being uprooted from the ground, and many windows of shops and houses were broken. The entire village was in panic at the sudden, unexplained appearance of such a strong blizzard. It was the first blizzard that many of them had ever seen, experienced. All around Naruto, everything was in a chaos. If one was to look through the blinding blizzard, they would have been shocked to see a small white bubble of pure wind and snow, glowing eerily white. What was even more shocking was the fact that inside this bubble was a small white-haired child, crying his heart out, completely unaffected by the chaotic, destructive blizzard howling around him. Naruto thought about his life. He thought about how lonely he was, watching other kids play, having fun, enjoying their childhood, whilst he watched from far away, longing to just, even for a second, to feel like that. At times he would sneak out his room and go to the playing ground and watch the other kids play around. At one time he had even tried to approach a group of kids that looked to be the same age as him, but the moment the children had seen him, they had run away from him in fear. The adults were even worse. They would always call him hurtful names and on many occasions chase him out of their shops or vendors. After a while he had accepted it all and become numb to the hurtful words and glares. It still hurt him, but not as painful as it used to be, but the stinging, lingering sensation in his chest always remained there. He wondered what would happen if he died. Would he finally see his parents, and if he did, would they love him? Would they want like he had seen all the other parents do with their own children? Whatever the answer was, one thing was certain: he wouldn't have to live in the village and its people. Anywhere and anything was better than that, he thought to himself. He slowly raised his head and looked at his hand. A crystal blue kunai made purely out of ice rested in it. He briefly wondered where the blade had come from, seeing as he had not once had a kunai on his form. Nor had he ever held one in his life, especially not one as beautiful and deadly looking like the one in his hand. His eyes hardened, and without a second thought, he brought the kunai to his chest with as much force as he could master. Time seemed to slow down as the kunai moved to his chest. The kunai approached his chest, and at the very moment the sharp edge of the deadly weapon made contact with his shirt, it shattered like glass into 1,000 sparkling shards. Naruto looked at the pieces of ice falling with a look of surprise and disappointment in his eyes. He was about to move on to something else when he felt something land in front of him, 3 somethings to be exact. He looked up and saw 3 black figures obscured by a heavy blowing white wind. Blood-red eyes with 3 rotating tomos stared directly into his ocean blue ones. He found himself being drawn to the wired eyes. At that moment they were the most captivating things he had ever seen. Everything around him swayed a bit, but he paid no mind to it. His eyes focused in a trance-like state to the weird eyes. The last thing he saw were the red eyes closing before his eyelids became too heavy to keep open and sleep claimed him. For what seemed like 100th time that day, Hiruzen sighed. A few minutes ago he had been called into his office because a messenger carrier bird from Kumo had arrived with important news. Apparently the Reikage had written a letter telling them he wanted to set up treaty with Konoha. He had spent the next few minutes with his advisors discussing the letter when out of the blue a strong blizzard had appeared. Worried, Hiruzen had sent several Anbu units to find the one person whom he knew was the cause of the blizzard. Whilst his Anbu were out searching for Naruto, Hiruzen used his crystal ball to find Naruto, and upon locating him, he had almost gotten a heart attack at what he saw. Naruto was about to commit suicide. That was bad, horribly bad. If Naruto succeeded in killing himself, it would not only be an insult to his parents' sacrifice, but it could also release the Kyuubi, and this time there would not be another Minato to seal it away. He doubted that he who has long since passed his prime would be able to defeat the beast, let alone seal it. His blood ran cold when he saw Naruto stabbing himself with the kunai, but that soon gave away when instead of the kunai going through the boy's chest like he expected it to, the kunai shattered like a glass. He breathed a sigh of relief when an Anbu team arrived and quickly knocked him out. The howling blizzard outside disappeared like it had never been there to begin with, and to his amazement and slight joy the dark clouds too disappeared, revealing behind them a beautiful red and orange sky. Hiruzen gazed at the setting sun and a sudden sense of nostalgia came over him. How long had it been since he had seen the sun? He knew that it wouldn't last for long, for the moment Naruto woke up the village would be once again blanketed by the ever-dark clouds. He heard someone knocking on the door, putting the crystal ball back into his drawer and closing it. He sat in his chair and took out his smoking pipe. "Come in," he said out loud, loud enough for the person behind the door to hear him. The door opened and a young nurse walked inside, bowing when she was fully inside. The Hokage waved his hand and indicated to the chair in front of his desk. Getting the message, the young nurse approached the chair and sat down on it. She then proceeded to give the Hokage her report about the new patient that had arrived in the hospital a few minutes ago. After she had finished giving her report, the Hokage had asked her to inform him when Naruto had woke up, and with that she had left the office, leaving the old-aged Hokage to himself and his thoughts. XXX The following day XXX Naruto slowly opened his eyes to find himself in very white room. The room was so bright that the moment he opened his eyes he quickly closed them in pain. He made to rub them only to find that he couldn't lift his arms up. Confused as to why that was so, he opened his eyes again, this time taking great care not to open them too quickly, and looked at his hands. To his surprise and growing confusion, he saw that both his hands were tied to the hospital bed and had silky white gloves on them. Before he could look further into the gloves and figure out how he had gotten himself in the situation he was in, he heard the door open. Turning his head to the door, Naruto saw the old man, whose name he had yet to find out, walk inside the room with a sad and worried look on his face. The old man walked inside the room and stood a few meters from his bed. For few minutes the old man did not say a word. He looked at Naruto and then averted his eyes to the window and sighed in disappointment when he saw the buildings of his village through the window. To think they could drive a young child this far, Hiruzen thought bitterly as he looked at the village. He turned his gaze back Naruto, who was staring at him with a blank but slightly confused eye. "Naruto-kun," he began softly, "do you know why you are here?" he asked, trying to get the full story from the child himself, though he had a very good guess why. Naruto paused for a few seconds as he tried to come up with an answer to the question. The last thing he remembered was staring at the weird red eyes and falling asleep after that. He racked his brain further too and remembered that he had been thrown out of the orphanage, and after that he had tried to kill himself. He averted his eyes from the old man, suddenly feeling ashamed of himself, and looked at the ceiling instead. "I tried to kill myself," he said in an emotionless tone. The Hokage stepped closer to the boy and sat on the bed. "Why would you try to do something like that, Naruto? There are many people who would be very sad and disappointed if you killed yourself," Hiruzen replied, trying to appeal to the boy and make him understand that he should never try to do what he failed to do last night. Naruto's anger spiked a bit when he heard the old man say that he had no friends, no relatives and no family, who would be sad and disappointed if he killed himself. In fact, he was sure everyone would actually celebrate if he died. Heck, they might even declare the day he died a public holiday. Who would be sad?" Naruto asked, his tone gaining a sharp edge to it. The Hokage was about to answer when he stopped himself. The boy did have pain. Not many people would miss him if he did die, and the ones that did were all reclusive of the boy. His godfather was somewhere in the world peeping on women for his book and running his spy network. His godmother had left the village with her apprentice a few months before Naruto was born and was somewhere in the elemental nations drinking and gambling with money that she did not have. The other person was Kakashi, but the young man was still grieving his sensei's death and was the Anbu commander. "Well, I for one would be sad if you died, and I'm sure parents would be sad too," he said truthfully. If Naruto could cross his arms he would, so instead he settled for a small huff. "They are dead, they left me when I was born. If they cared about me then they wouldn't have." Naruto stopped talking. When he saw the angry glare that the old man was sending him, add to that he could also feel a large amount of negative emotions, which he easily identified as anger, coming from the old man. "Your parents loved you very much. They sacrificed their lives for you. The least you can do for them is be grateful and not throw away their sacrifice by ending your own life." His anger was not entirely directed at Naruto. He was angry at himself for allowing Naruto to suffer this much, that he had to try and commit suicide to escape his painful life. He had let the villagers get away with far too much, and after today things were going to change. "You knew my parents?" Naruto suddenly asked. Hiruzen cursed himself for not being careful with his words. "I'm sorry my boy, but you are not ready to know about them," Hiruzen said with a sigh. Naruto nodded his head in agreement, but inside he was heartbroken and disappointed. Even the old man, he thought sadly. "Now Naruto-kun, my Anbu said they found your clothes and some of your belongings with you. Can you tell me why that is?" Hiruzen asked, changing the subject. Naruto frowned. "They kicked me out of the orphanage, said there was not enough space anymore." Hiruzen frowned at that. He would have to send some Anbu to investigate the meter, and unfortunately for Naruto, even if they found the orphanage to be at fault, which it was, for kicking out a 4-year-old child into the streets, there was not much he could do to punish them. The orphanage was run by the civilian council, and the Hokage had no power over the business that belonged to the civilian council. A law that was created by the first Hokage to make the civilians feel more comfortable, being civilians and all, and have some power of their own. He couldn't have Naruto live in the streets. He was far too young and would be attacked by the villagers if left alone. That meant that he had to find him a home. Putting him in with one of the clans would be a better choice, as many of the clans did not harbor an ill will for the boy, but that would make the other clans start to protest, as they will feel that the clan would have too much power, and finding a person to adopt Naruto was defiantly out of the question. That meant that the only choice left was for him to find a house for Naruto to live in, and as reluctant as he was, Naruto would have to live alone. He thought about any vacant houses and couldn't think of any. Konoha was a hidden village and always received a surplus of people every year. Accommodation was hard to find, and many houses were still being rebuilt after the Kyuubi attack. His eyes lit up a bit when he remembered a particular document that he had to sign today. It was a report about an abandoned house near the red light district. The owner had been killed in the Kyuubi attack and had no living relatives to claim the house. The house was fully furnished, though after 4 years of not being attended to it was now rundown and required a lot of tending to before it could be used. He would have to send a few genins to clean the house. "Not to worry, I have an old house of mine that I used to use when I was a genin, and now it belongs to you." Naruto snapped his hat from the ceiling to the old man. "Why, you're giving me your house?" "Why?" Naruto asked unbelievably. It all sounded too good to be true. Hiruzen gave the boy a kind smile. "Well, I can't have my grandson live in the streets now, can I? What kind of grandfather would that make me?" he said with a small chuckle in the end. Naruto stared at the old man with pure shock written on his face. He had known the old for barely a year now. The old man had visited the orphanage one day and had played with all the kids. He of course had stayed in his room the whole time, but somehow the man knew where he was and had entered his room. At first Naruto was wary of the man, but after not sensing any negative emotions from the man towards him, he had let his guard down a bit. After that, the old would occasionally visit the orphanage, and after spending some time with the other kids he would visit him in his room. He had come to like the old man and would be exited whenever he would visit, and now the old man was giving him his house. Naruto looked at the old man, know his grandfather, and for the first time in his life a small smile made its way across his face. His grandfather, that made him smile. Naruto sat on his bed looking at his gloved hands with a critical eye. The gloves were pure white and were made of very soft silk, and in the palms of both hands, gloves were very small markings that were barely visible unless one was to look closely. He remembered what his grandfather had told him about the gloves and why he was supposed to always have them on. Flashback, 2 days earlier after the doctors and nurses had looked him over and checked if everything was fine, Naruto was released from his bed in the hospital. His grandfather had then taken him to his new house, which was about half a kilometer from the hospital. When they arrived at his new house, Naruto was surprised to find that it was a whole apartment complex instead of just a single house. The building itself was fairly large, but looked to be rundown and in need of some repairs, to fix the exterior at least. Inside, the house had 4 rooms which included a kitchen, with a stove, kitchen unit and fridge. A bathroom with a shower and a bathing tub, a small living room equipped with a large couch and a brown, plain, table with a single chair, and finally his bedroom, which had a single bed, a wardrobe and a small desk that was facing the single window in the room. Now remember Naruto-kun, I'm giving this house to you. Which means that you will be responsible for keeping it clean and making sure that nothing gets damaged or stolen, okay? Hiruzen said, giving the small 4-year-old boy a slightly serious look. Naruto gave him a small nod but said nothing. Don't try to use the stove or cook anything for that matter. Someone will come and give you food 3 times a day every day. And I will give you a weekly allowance of 50 yen, for you to use as you please. Naruto gave another small nod. What are these for? Naruto asked finally, speaking for the first time since he had left the hospital. He raised his hands to show the white gloves on them. I'm sure by now you have noticed that you are special, or so to speak, Hiruzen began, earning a confused and slightly hesitant nod from Naruto. You, my boy, have an amazing gift. A gift to control and produce ice at will. Unfortunately, as you are now, you can't control that gift and unconsciously cause things to freeze when they come into direct contact with you. That's where these gloves come in. They will help you to have some control over your powers and will allow you to interact with things without accidentally freezing them. Hiruzen gave Naruto a kind smile. He was happy that Jiraiya had come up with a way to help Naruto with his powers after he had heard about them. He created chakra restraining seals in the gloves, but unlike the usual chakra restraining seals that would completely cut off the chakra circulation in the body, the seals he had created suppressed a small amount of chakra that was circulating in his body, specifically his hands. However, this did not stop him from freezing anyone who touched him. It only allowed him to touch things with his hands without freezing them and help suppress his overly growing chakra reserves. Naruto looked at his hands for a second and looked up at the old cage. Thank you, he said silently, looking away from the old man as he did so, to hide the tears that were threatening to fall from his eyes. Hiruzen gave a small-heartedly chuckle. Anything for my favorite grandson. Now how about we explore the rest of this building and get you acquainted with your new home? Flashback end that had been 2 days ago, and since then he hadn't seen his grandfather again. True to his grandfather's words, someone did come to give him a meal every day, 3 times to be exact. It was a purple-haired woman who always wore a white Neko mask that hid her face. In the 6 times he had seen her, she had never said a single word to him, or even interact with him in any manner. She would bring his food and would leave the moment he finished eating it. A small part of him was disheartened at how she ignored him just like everyone else in the village, but a bigger and more dominant part of him wasn't all that fazed with it and just slightly relived that he couldn't sense any negative intentions or emotions directed at him from her. Aside from the visits of Neko, as he had named her in his mind, nothing else had changed in Naruto's life. Well, not really nothing. When he had decided to give up on life and join his parents in the other world of the dead, that moment when he was about to kill himself and be done with it, Naruto had discovered something about his powers. With his powers, he had constructed a kunai knife, even though said weapon had failed to do its job and had shattered like glass a mere seconds after its creation. It still brought many questions and spiked his curiosity. For what seemed like an eternity he looked at both his hands. If he could create a kunai knife, what else could he create? And could he create it again, or was it just a one-time thing? A picture of the same blue kunai he had created back then appeared in his mind, and to his sheer amazement pure white snow gathered in the palm of his right hand, swirling and twisting. This only lasted for more than a few seconds before it hardened and started to take form. Naruto watched on curiously as the snow, now ice, started to form into a beautiful deep blue kunai knife with a very sharp and deadly-looking, glowing blade. He held the kunai, which was small enough for him to get a good grip of the handle, tightly in his hand and could feel, to be frank, like the kunai was alive, as though it was small piece of him. His eyes narrowed slightly. I wonder, he threw the kunai in his hand as hard as he could at the wall in front of him. Much to his surprise and awe, the moment the kunai hit the wall it didn't shatter like glass like the first time he had used it, on himself. Instead, it pieced right through the walls. He stood up and walked out of his bedroom and into the small living room. His eyes widened slightly when he saw the kunai that he had thrown lodged deeply into the wall directly opposite to his bedroom, with only a small part of the handle being visible. The kunai had cut right through his bedroom wall and flown straight into the opposite room, which was the living room, and stopped when it hit the walls in that room. I wonder how I'm going to remove it, he thought to himself as he looked at the kunai which was at his eye level. The only way to get it out was to dig around the kunai to get a better grip on it and pull it out. He looked around his living room for anything to use and frowned when he didn't find anything sharp enough for the deed. An idea suddenly struck him. He raised his hand and a swell of snow appeared in it. After the snow disappeared, a replica of the kunai he was trying to retrieve appeared in his hand. He inspected the kunai for a second and saw that it was the exact replica of the kunai lodged in the walls. A small smile crept its way across his face. Just as he was about to dig into the wall with his new kunai, a small explosion startled him, halting him in his tracks. "Oji-san?" Naruto asked as he turned around. And sure enough there stood the old Kage, garbed in his usual attire, which consisted of a large red hat and long white robe. "Good to see you too, Naruto." Hiruzen froze when he saw the kunai in Naruto's hand. "What are you doing?" he asked worriedly. Naruto looked away from the old Kage and turned to face the wall instead. "I want to remove that," he pointed at the kunai knife sticking out from the wall. Hiruzen sighed in relief. He was worried that Naruto was about to cut himself off, not wanting to think further of the horrifying matter. "How did it get in, and where did you get such a kunai?" Hiruzen asked. He knew where the kunai had come from. After all, he had seen Naruto created days ago. But he wanted for Naruto to open up to him more and trust him. "I threw it and it got stuck," Naruto stated. He paused and looked down at the kunai in his hand. "I created them also." Though he did not show it, Hiruzen was very glad that Naruto had been upfront and honest with him. Even if it was about something as trivial as where he had gotten a kunai from, to him it showed that Naruto was not shutting himself from everyone. "Created it? Can you show me how?" Naruto raised his left hand and swirl of pure white snow appeared in it. When the swirl cleared, behind it was a replica of the kunai knife of his left hand. "May I?" Hiruzen asked, sounding very astonished. Naruto nodded his head and handed the kunai to the old-aged Kage. The moment Hiruzen touched the kunai, his eyes widened a bit and he instantly let go of the kunai. What was that? Hiruzen thought in alarm. He cast a wary glance towards the kunai he had just dropped. "Are you okay?" Naruto asked after seeing Hiruzen's reaction, a rare look of worry appearing on his usually stoic face. Hiruzen shook his head slightly and gave Naruto a smile. "I'm fine, I didn't expect the kunai to be so cold, that's all," he lied. Naruto didn't say anything afterwards and opted to stare at Hiruzen, waiting for him to tell him what he had come to see him for. "I came to see you were doing. How do you like your house so far?" Hiruzen asked. Naruto looked away from him and looked around the living room they were in. After a few seconds he responded. "It is nice, thank you." Hiruzen chuckled. "Don't mention it, my boy, like I said anything for my favorite grandson. Now why don't we head out for a little work? There is something that I want to show you that I think you might find very interesting," Hiruzen suggested. "No," was Naruto's instant reply. Hiruzen's smile did not falter. "I guess that's okay. Sad really, in here I wanted to show you one of the best ramen shops in Konoha." Naruto whipped his head around to face Hiruzen so fast that it made an audible snap. "Ramen?" Naruto nearly shouted. He had only eaten ramen 2 times. First time when the matron at the orphanage had given them all, him included for once, ramen as a treat. The second time was when his Oji-san had come to visit him, carrying with him the heavenly food in a bento box. Each time he had eaten ramen, he had loved it, no he became addicted to it. He had never tasted anything so delicious in his entire life, short as it may be, and the prospect of eating ramen again was very welcome to one. Okay, okay? Hiruzen repeated with an all-knowing smirk on his face. Let's go, Naruto said with a hint of excitement in his voice as he made his way towards the door. Just like you, Kushina, Hiruzen thought sadly, looking at the retreating form of Naruto. The duo, Hokage and boy, approached a small stand with kanji, Ichiraku ramen, written on a white cloth hanging over the small shop. Naruto stopped just a few meters shy of the ramen shop. Seeing this and knowing the reason for it, Hiruzen placed a comforting hand on Naruto's clothed shoulder. Naruto looked up and saw his Oji-san giving him smile. He always seemed to be smiling, he noted. Come on, we've reached our destination, let's go in, Hiruzen said. Still Naruto did not bulge. A small sigh escaped his mouth. The owner is very kind, Naruto, he won't kick you out. Naruto stared at the shop for a little while longer. He really wanted to believe the old man, but after being kicked out so many times out of every shop he had ever entered, he knew all too well just exactly how this was going to play out. Oji-san or not, the shop owner was going to kick him out. You wouldn't want me to go in there alone, would you? Hiruzen said, feigning a mock-hurt face. Naruto shook his head and with a bit of hesitation, walked into the ramen shop. The first thing that Naruto noticed, or rather smelled, was the very strong, intoxicating aroma of ramen in the air. The second thing he noticed were the rows of stools in front of an orange-red counter. Behind the counter was an aged man wearing white robes and a white chef's hat. When the man saw just who had entered his store, his eyes widened and instantly he bowed his head. Hiruzen, seeing this, waved his hand casually. None of that now, Tuchi-san. I'm the Hokage only in my office, he said with a small laugh at the end. Hi Hokage-sama, so what is it that day? Tuchi asked. Well, why don't you ask Naruto-kun here? I'm treating him to the best ramen in the village. Tuchi looked besides the Hokage and saw a little white-haired kid with the most startling blue eyes he had ever seen staring blankly at him. The kid was wearing a plain white shirt with gray shorts and blue shoes. This made him gasp lightly. Considering how cold it was outside, he wondered how the child was not quivering like a leaf right now. Well, I'll be, he began. Naruto looked on as Tuchi's head fell. His shoulders started to shake. He suddenly looked up, looking directly at Naruto with fire blazing in his eyes. A new castomer, Ayame. Preaper our ramen specail. We've got a new castomer, he shouted excitedly. I'll be out in a sec, a voice, belonging to a girl, shouted back from behind the shop. A few minutes later, a girl no older than 8 years old appeared from behind the shop with a steaming bowl in her hands. She put the bowl in on the counter, right in front of Naruto, and started at him expectantly, not muttering a single word. All eyes turned on Naruto, watching him closely, waiting for him to eat the bowl of ramen. Naruto muttered a small, thank you, before he grabbed the 2 chopsticks that were placed beside the bowl. He dipped the chops in the bowl and grabbed some noodles with them. He brought the food to his mouth and stopped just a few inches from his face. He looked up from the noodles in his hands and looked at the 2 people who had given him the food. The 2, father and daughter, quickly nodded their heads in encouragement. Not wasting a beat, he placed the food in his mouth. Naruto had eaten a few things in his life that he could honestly say were delicious, ramen being the top amongst them. But this pushed past the boundaries of what could describe as delicious. Never in his life had he ever eaten something so good before. Not even the ramen he had eaten previously could even hope to compare to what was in his mouth. Within the blink of an eye the bowl was empty, and a very hungry Naruto could be seen holding the bowl with both his hands towards the chef. More, Naruto nearly shouted, stunning all the occupants in the room, 2 for finishing the ramen so fast and the other for actually speaking so loudly. But. How did you, when did you? The girl stuttered incoherently. Both Hiruzen and the ramen started laughing. I guess that means you like it, Tuchi said between laughs. Ayame-chan, prepare another bowl ramen for the boy. Hi Tu-san, Ayame exclaimed, having gotten off her shocked state, and moved to make more ramen. That's my daughter, Ayame, she's currently training to be a chef just like her old man, Tuchi said. Hiruzen nodded his head sagely. Starting them they're still young. She is really passionate about her job. That she is, she might be young but already she can cook ramen almost like a pro. If I'm not careful she might surpass me in a few years from now, take over the shop, Tucci said, looking proudly at his daughter. Well, the young generation is supposed to surpass the older generation after all, Hiruzen added. Done, Ayame exclaimed, cutting the small chatter between the two adults. Naruto wasted no time in devouring the bowl placed in front of. After finishing the ramen, in record time, he looked up to ask for more but found the ramen chef busy talking to the old man and the girl nowhere to found. Are they real? A voice spoke up besides Naruto, scaring the life out of him. He turned his head and the ramen girl seating besides him, staring right at him with curiosity clearly written on her face. Oh, sorry, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Ayame Ichiraku, and the old man over there is my father. She pointed at the Tucci, who muttered, I'm not that old, under his breath. However, everyone heard him. And you, what's your name? She asked. Naruto Uzumaki, Naruto responded back quietly. Unfortunately, I have to go now. Naruto-kun, would you like to stay here or should I take you home instead? Hiruzen said as he stood up from his seat. Naruto shook his head and with some difficulty got off seat. He grabbed Hiruzen's hand. Wait! Ayame suddenly shouted. She jumped off her stool and ran to the back of the store. After a few seconds, she appeared to everyone's view holding something red in her hands. She approached Naruto and handed him the red thing in her hand. See. Here, she said. What is it? Naruto asked, only to see it was a scarf. A scarf? You look cold and well, I just wanted to take it. She all but shoved the red scarf into Naruto's only free hand. Naruto accepted the scarf and thanked Ayame, then the two disappeared in a swirl of leaves. He's cute, isn't he? Yeah. Ayame agreed off without a second thought, her eyes widened in shock and blood rushed to her face when she realized just what she had said. To-san. Tucci could only laugh xxx. The next day xxx Naruto walked through the snow-covered busy streets of Konoha. Ignoring the glares and fearful looks he was receiving like usual. As he was walking, people would move out of his way. Some were going as far as to push others out of their way to get away from him. With the ever-present detached look on his face, Naruto made his way across the village to his destination. After walking past the many sectors and house of Konoha, he had finally reached his destination, not sensing anyone, aside from Neko. Using the area, Naruto walked towards the empty training ground. He struggled slightly against the snow, which was reaching his knees, as he made his way towards the 3 training stumps in the middle of the training ground. After making the laborious journey, for him, he stood about 100 meters from the training stumps. 2 kunai appeared in his hand and just like he had seen several ninja do it before, Naruto flung both kunai towards the stumps with both hands. Not too surprising, to anyone but him. Both kunai missed their targets and flew harmlessly past the stumps, missing all 3 by a margin. Naruto tilted his head slightly in confusion. He had done exactly the same thing as the other ninja when they had thrown their kunai. 2 more kunai appeared in his hands and just as he had done previously, he threw the kunai and just like the first time they both missed. In fact, their aim was even worse than before. Naruto repeated this several times, all throughout getting the same if not worse results. Getting annoyed, Naruto started throwing kunai after kunai in quick succession and as another set of kunai metallized in his hands, a voice stopped him. You're doing it wrong. The voice clearly belonged to a child and girl adorned from behind him. Naruto froze for a second in surprise, having not felt the person approach him, but did not respond or even turn around to see who it was. He ignored the girl and continued with what he had been doing. For several more minutes Naruto continued throwing kunai after kunai, all missing their intended targets. The sound of metal cutting through the air was all the warning Naruto got before he heard 3 thumbs. He looked at the 3 stumps in front of him and saw 3 metallic kunai lodged at the center of each stump. Look, you can be all stubborn as you want. You're still not going to hit anything, the girl spoke up again in an annoyed tone. Naruto's eyes narrowed slightly but did not respond. He started throwing more kunai at the stump faster and wilder. Will you stop and just listen to me, Al? Shut up, Naruto said finally, closing his eyes tightly and opened them a second later when he heard the girl behind him gasp. The sight that greeted him when he opened his eyes made him stumble back in surprise. It seemed that sometime during his training, it had started to snow and now all that was frozen in mid-fall. The dozens of kunai he had just thrown were also frozen in mid-air. How are you doing that? The girl stuttered as she asked this. Naruto didn't respond back. He stared with wide eyes at the frozen scene in front of him. After a few seconds he spoke. I don't know. He raised his hand and touche of snowflakes around him, and to his surprise, everything started moving again. All the kunai missed their target and the snow continued falling. For a few tense seconds the clearing was silent. The only sounds that could be heard were that of the wind blowing and the occasional chipping of birds. That only lasted for a few seconds until the girl behind Naruto shouted, drawing out every word. Naruto turned around to see the person behind him and saw that it was a girl that was slightly taller than him. She had brown hair that was tied in 4 buns that matched very well with her dark brown eyes. For her clothing she was wearing a pick sweater with a yellow shirt inside, and dark blue pants. The girl gave him a large beaming smile and rushed towards him with stars in her eyes. That was so awesome. How did you do that? How did you create those kunai? Can you show me how to do that? Please teach me how you did that. Please. The girl pleaded with her hands held together. Naruto took a step backwards due to the very close proximity of the girl to him. This unfortunately caused him to trip in the snow, fall backwards. However, instead of falling backwards like he expected to, he felt something akin to a wall press against his back, breaking his fall. After straightening himself up, Naruto looked back at the wall that had saved him from falling and saw a thin blue wall made of pure ice there. The girl squealed loudly and moved to inspect the ice wall. It's so thin, yet she took out a kunai, from Kami knows where, and hit the wall with it. Not even a scratch. She said this as she repeatedly stuck the wall with her kunai. After waiting for the girl to stop ogling at the wall, which she did not, Naruto finally spoke. Who are you? He asked just loud enough for her to hear him. The girl stopped what she was doing and blushed. Oh, sorry about that. I get overexcited sometimes. My name is Tenten. She stretched her hand to greet him. Naruto stared at the outstretched hand in confusion. Was he supposed to do something? Seeing that the boy in front of her was not responding the gesture, Tenten brought her hand back. An air of awkwardness surrounded the two as neither was willing to say anything else. Well? Tenten asked, breaking the ice. Naruto tilted his to the side in confusion. Well, what? He asked with a raised eyebrow. Sigh. Aren't you going to introduce yourself? Why? Naruto asked, generally confused. A tick mark appeared on Tenten's forehead. Because it's common courtesy to do so, she all but shouted out. Oh, was Naruto's only reply. My name is Naruto. Tenten smiled happily. See, that wasn't hard now, was it? Naruto shook his head. It was a rhetorical question, she thought with a sweat drop. What are you doing here? I'm joining the academy next year, so I'm training to become stronger. That way next year I will have an advantage over the other students and be ranked top of the class. Oh, Naruto responded back. He turned around and started throwing more ice kunai at the post, completely ignoring Tenten. Look, you're throwing them incorrectly. You shouldn't stretch your hand out like that. Just look how it's done, okay? Tenten took a step forward and threw 2 kunai at once. However, only one of the kunai hit the stump. I'm still training, so my aim isn't all that perfect yet, she laughed, clearly embarrassed. Naruto tried imitating what Tenten had just done but still couldn't hit his target. How do you do that? I just throw them and, no, I mean how do you create those kunai, with ice? Naruto shrugged his shoulders and created another kunai in his hand. I just think about a kunai and it gets created. Tenten closed her eyes and her face scrunched in concentration. After a few seconds she opened them and sighed disappointedly. I guess I can't do it. Anything to report, Neko? Hiruzen asked the kneeling Enbu in front of his desk. No, Hokage-sama. Aside from learning how to create ice contracts, nothing about him has changed. Neko, still kneeling down, responded in a monotone tone. Hiruzen sighed. Keep watching him and report anything. Hokage-sama. Hiruzen gave a small nod. I have reason to believe that Naruto-san might also be a censor. Now this made old Kage raise his eyebrows in surprise. Oh, a censor? Yes, Hokage-sama. For the past 2 days he has been able to locate me in all the areas I have hidden myself in. A censor? Is part of his Kekkei Genkai? Minato was a sensor, but his sensory skill only worked when he was touching the ground with his hands. Could it be perhaps that young Naruto got a more advanced ability from his father? Hiruzen speculated. Hokage-sama? Neiko asked, as the Hokage had just blanked out and became silent. Hiruzen snapped out his thoughts and addressed the increasingly worried Anbu. That will be Neiko. The female Anbu nodded her head and vanished in a leaf shunshin. Hiruzen was about to continue with his paperwork when something in the corner of his eye caught his attention. He turned his head to look at the object and saw that He stood up and walked to the large window in his office and looked outside. The sight that he was greeted made the dark clouds that was ever present above Konoha, blanketing the entire village in darkness and always snowing, were parting, allowing for the sun's warm golden rays to penetrate through. It was not the sight of the clouds dissipating or the sun's rays that invoked such a feeling in old Kage's heart. No, it was the knowledge that wherever Naruto was, he was happy. "Hey!" Tenten suddenly shouted. Naruto jumped slightly and responded back, "Why yes?" She blushed slightly and blurted out, "Wanna be my friend?" As ironic as it may sound, Naruto froze. His whole body stiffened. For what seemed like an eternity, Naruto did not move. "Hey, are you okay?" Tenten asked worriedly. She tried to grab Naruto's shoulders, but a small white gloved hand grabbed her hand instead. She looked on in confusion and saw Naruto looking at the ground with his hair shadowing his eyes. You're not afraid, you don't feel like them, why?" Naruto asked quietly, with his eyes still shadowed by his hair. Tenten pulled her hand free from Naruto's grasp. He wasn't holding it very tightly, so it was easy for her to release it. "Why would I be afraid of you? I mean, you don't look scary to me." She inched forward a bit. "So you want to be my friend?" Again Naruto did not respond, for as long as he could remember. Naruto had always wished to have a friend, just one. Countless days passed and all he could do was seeing other kids playing with other kids, having fun, and he just a mere spectator. He once tried approaching some kids. At first they accepted him, heck, they even wanted to play with him. That was all until their parents saw them, and instantly took them away from him, warning them to never ever talk or even associate with him. That had hit him hard. He then spent the next few days cooped up in his room at the orphanage. After that incident he never bothered trying to approach the other kids anymore. They all avoided him like a plague. But now, standing in front of him was someone else who was offering their friendship. Never in his life did he dream that a day like his one would come. A day when someone who offered their hand of friendship to him. In the back of his mind he knew that the friendship would never last, for the moment the girl's parents got a whiff of their relationship they would instantly savoir it. However, even knowing this, he still wanted to be friends with her. He wanted to see and feel what it was like to have a friend. Even if it was only for a few hours or better yet days, just once more couldn't hurt, could it? "Hey, you don't have to yes if you don't want," Tenten said worriedly, after seeing that Naruto had not responded back to her for quite some time. Naruto's head snapped upwards when she said that. "No, I want to be friends," he responded back timidly. "Great, so what do you want to do?" Naruto shrugged his shoulders. "I don't know, how about we play a game then?" Naruto's eyes, "What game?" "How about hide and seek? I'll hide and you seek, okay?" Naruto gave small nod at that, the prospect sounding very appealing to him. After all, it would be the first time he would play a game with someone. "Okay, then close your eyes and count to 10, Tenten instructed. Again Naruto nodded his head and proceeded to close his eyes. 1, 2, 3, Tenten hastily ran away from Naruto to go hide herself. Naruto stopped counting, he only knew how to count to 3. Tenten, who hadn't gotten that far yet, stopped running when she heard Naruto stop. She turned around and walked back towards the white-haired boy. "Hey, why'd you stop?" "I can't count." "Oh, how about we Tenten raked her brain, trying to come up with something fun for them to do. She snapped her fingers when an idea struck her. "How about we play tag instead?" she said excitedly. Much to her disappointment, Naruto shook his head saying no, no. "Why?" she whined. Naruto hesitated before responding back to her, "I can't." In truth, he desperately wanted to play the game. Having watched other children play the game, he too wanted to play it. However, he also knew the consequences of him playing, should she accidentally touch him. "Come, it's very easy. Look, I'll even show you," Tenten pressed on. Again Naruto shook his head, as much as he wanted to he couldn't. Tenten pouted. She was hoping her new friend would at least play something with her, but with how he was refusing everything, she doubted he would say yes to anything. How about I help you learn how to throw then, and in return you make more of cool things out of ice? Tenten suggested with an excited glint in her eyes. Naruto gave the overexcited, energetic and slightly weird girl a small nod. Few hours later a loud squeal throughout the small snow-covered clearing. A few moments later another squeal rang again. The owner of said squeal, you might ask? A small 5-year-old girl kneeling on the cold white ground looking at the object in front of her with amazement in her eyes. To her right was another child, slightly shorter than her and a year younger than the little girl. Unlike his counterpart, he was crouched on the ground staring at the object on front them with a small frown on his face. In front of them was a single flower. Now this wasn't just a normal flower. The flower was blue and cooler with pure white petals. Something peculiar about the flower was that it was made of ice with the petals being made out of snow. Tenten, unable to hold herself back anymore, touched the petals of the flower. The petals, being made with but a small thin layer of snow, didn't hold out and broke off from the rest of the flower, leaving behind a. Tenten pouted. Ah, it broke. Make something else. Naruto shook his head and stood from his position. It's getting late, I have to go home soon or else my parents will start getting worried, Tenten said with small frown. She quickly stood up and went to collect the few kunai she had thrown hours earlier to make a point to a certain white-haired boy. After finishing collecting the kunai, Tenten ran back to where Naruto was standing. I'll see you tomorrow, okay? With that said, she hastily made her way out of the clearing heading home, though not before shouting, "Bye Naruto-kun." Naruto waved his hand back at his new friend. Hey, you didn't teach me how to throw kunai, Naruto muttered, with a small frown on his face. A small smile spread about his whiskered face when he remembered what Tenten had said, she would come again the following day. Tomorrow they would play again, even if all she wanted to do was to see him make things out of ice. He looked up at the sky, noticing for the first time that there were only a few clouds there. Maybe life wasn't so bad after all. He had a friend, that was all he had ever wanted. Tenten was a happy girl. She lived with both her parents, a loving pair too. She was currently training to be a ninja, although not a prodigy. Like some people were saying about her classmate, a stuck-up prick by the name of Neji, she was the best at weapons usage in her entire age group. And finally, and most importantly to her, she had a best friend. Her best friend, words that she never thought she would one day get to say. It wasn't that she didn't have friends or anything like that, far from it actually. She did have friends at the academy, but they were more interested in playing princess and fighting over which boy was the cutest. Whilst she herself was more into learning more about being a ninja and playing with her weapons, not the fake stuff that they hand out at the academy though. Nobody wanted to be best friends with a tomboy like her. And the fact that Naruto had a super duper awesome keki, what? Was it again that sensei had said it was? Well, whatever it was called, her sensei had said that some people were born with special abilities unique to their family lines and all that. Like the Hyuga and their creepy white eyes for example. That made her think about her best friend, Naruto. He had the ability to control ice. And she had never seen anyone else who could do what he could do, control ice, which meant it was unique to him, right? Now going by her line of thought, surely his parents must have had the same ability, and if his parents had the same ability, then there was possibly a clan out there of super ice-wielding people like him, which meant he had to have relatives alive somewhere? An excited grin spread about her face. She had to tell this to Naruto. Pushing chakra into her legs, a skill she had learned not so long ago at the academy, Tenten disappeared in a burst of speed, taking off to the rooftops. A little while later, the first place that she checked was his house. It was a small apartment complex not too far from her own house. Easily reachable by feet, and for a ninja in training like her, only a few minutes of sprinting. Walking up to the door, she gave it a few loud knocks, just in case he was sleeping, and she was overly excited. After a few minutes of waiting and hearing no one inside, Tenten decided on a different kind of approach. A more effective kind of approach. Naruto. Naruto, open up, it's me. Ten. Well, that was bound to get his attention. No response. Okay, now she was getting irritated. That moron. He's probably sleeping right now and pretending not to hear me, she fumed. It wouldn't be the first time he had done it. This time, her knocks were louder and more aggressive. Naruto. If you know what's good for you, you'll open this door right now. Still, no response. She paused. Normally by now he would have been annoyed and opened up the door. Funny thing that Naruto usually did things she asked him to when he was annoyed. I guess he isn't home. She mulled the idea of his whereabouts in her head. I wonder where he is now. Well, I better start with the training ground. With her second destination in mind, Tenten took off in the direction of the training ground where their friendship had originally started. Training ground. Tenten arrived at the training ground to find it, much like Naruto's house, empty. Not even a trace of him to show that he had previously been there at least. She sighed. Well, that only leaves one last place to look, the lake. At the lake, the sight that greeted Tenten was one that made her mouth hang open in both awe and shock. The lake, a once crystal blue lake with water that seemed to glow every time light reflected off it, was frozen over. From her viewpoint, which was on the branch of a tree overlooking the entire lake, she could even see cold steam rolling off of it in waves. Well, now at least I know he's here. Now to find him. She looked around the lake, hoping to spot her friend. Spotting a mop of white hair, one of his most noticeable traits, she jumped to the ground below and took off in the direction where she had seen who she hoped was him. When she finally got to him, she found him sleeping peacefully on the ground, which was now also covered in ice. Sheesh, everything about him is associated with ice. She briefly wondered if he ever got cold ousting ice after all. Picking up a stick from the ground, she started poking him in the face with it. Best way to wake him or anyone up, that, and she wanted to get a little revenge for him making her search around the whole village. Unjustifiably justifiable revenge, she called it. A few pokes later and Naruto giddily rose from his sleep, not before snatching the stick from Tenten's hands and chunking it away in annoyance. You know, you could have just called my name and I would have woken up, Naruto drawled out, pushing himself up to look at his only friend, who actually looked happy with herself. Yeah, well, that was my revenge to you for making me search around the whole village for you. You could have just told me you would be here. Yano, Tenten responded in a matter-of-fact voice. Naruto chose not to inform her just how he was supposed to tell her he would be at the lake in the first place. It wasn't as though he had planned on it from the get-go. Wait, actually he had, and she knew that he was always here when he came back from the academy. I always come here, Naruto sighed out. Thankfully, for him, the words went unheard by the irate girl. Taking a good look at the lake once again, Tenten turned her gaze back onto Naruto. Why dya freeze the lake? She asked with curiosity laced in her voice. Naruto looked back at the frozen lake. Why again had he frozen it? After mulling it over in his head several times, he remembered. That's right, he had gotten bored waiting for Tenten to return from the academy and had begun to experiment. Long story cut short, one thing led to another and well, another led to a frozen lake. Sue, Tenten said expectantly. So what? Naruto responded back in his usual low, disinterested voice. A tick mark made its way across Tenten's face. Why did you freeze it? Naruto looked away from Tenten to hide the small blush of embarrassment on his face. I got bored. Hearing this, Tenten hung her head in resignation. Only her friend. A second later she was back to being her excited old self. And with the brightest grin Naruto had ever seen her give, she spoke up. Guess what sensei taught us today? Tenten asked excitedly, almost jumping up and down. Naruto gave her blank stare. How on earth was he supposed to guess such a thing? Not only did he not know what she had been taught, but Tenten was also a year older than him, meaning she was in a higher grade than him and was learning different things from him. You're no fun, Tenten whined, after seeing Naruto not go along with her game. Anyway, remember how you told me you have no parents? Naruto gave a hesitant nod, not really sure if he liked where this was going. Not having parents was a sore spot for him, a subject he would rather not have if he could avoid it. However, it seemed that today he was going to. Yes. Tenten's brown eyes lit up with joy for what she was about to revel. Well, something that sensei said to us today got me thinking. She said that people with kek whatnot are from clans. Her face twisted in an odd way as she tried to pronounce the word that her teacher had used to describe people with bloodline limits. OHK? Naruto responded, feeling slightly confused, wondering what was so exciting about that. Tenten let out a small giggle and took hold of Naruto's gloved hand. You're not getting it, silly, think about it. Okay, a bloodline. Limit is a gift that people of the same clan share, like the Sharingan for example. Naruto wanted to ask her just what a Sharingan was or why she didn't just say bloodline limit instead of that weird tongue-twisting word she had been forcing, but Tenten's enthusiasm and excitement made him stop himself, even if he was losing interest with each passing word. So anyways, my point is, if people with bloodline limits are from clans and you've got that cool ice power of yours, which is a bloodline limit, right? Right, then ultimately that means that you are also from a clan. And if you are from a clan, then there are other people with the same ability as yours and are your family, since a clan is the same thing, a big family. Isn't that great? It means that you have a family somewhere out there. That's good, right? Naruto shook his head a little and took his hands back from Tenten's grip. No, I don't have any family left. I already asked the old man and he said so. But you can't just give up like that. I don't care if I have a family or not, what difference does it make? Naruto retorted coldly. For a second it seemed as though his eyes glowed, but Tenten just played it off as being her imagination. Speaking of Tenten, the girl was so surprised by what her friend had said she had half a mind to shout at him. She couldn't begin to fathom how anyone would so easily disregard their family like that, and another thing, just who was this old man he was referring to? In all the time they had played together, more than a year now, he had not once mentioned this old man. The only old man she knew in his life was the one that owned the ramen stand that he so enjoyed visiting so much. Don't you at least want to know who your family is? By now Tenten was almost ventilating. Family, something he had wanted for as long as he could remember. Family, people who would love him for all his faults and more, even with his powers, and yet, no matter how hard he prayed, no matter how deeply he craved and cried for such a thing, he never got one. Eventually, he gave up. What use was a family to him now? He was happy now with the way his life was. He even had a family of his own now. The old man, the Ichiraku family, and finally his best friend Tenten. They were his most precious people, his family. So as far as he was concerned, he already had a family, blood relatives be damned. No, was the cold, empty response that left his lips. Tenten looked like she was about to pull her hair out. Here she was trying to help her friend out with finding his, not hers, his family, and he didn't even care. You know what? Fine then. If you don't care, then why should I? She screamed out in frustration and threw his hands in the air. A sign that she was close to blowing a gasket. She gave one last glare at Naruto and stomped off. Naruto looked at the retreating form of his best friend, wondering if he should call her back or not, but ultimately chose to not. He felt the amount of anger in her. It was best he let her calm down first before trying to talk to her again. And I really wanted to show her my new skill too, he thought bitterly. A couple of hours later, a very hungry and tired Naruto slowly made his way towards his favorite destination, Ichiraku Ramen. Walking around the village was always an experience for him, one that he hated. For one, the people around him would blatantly ignore his presence. Secondly, almost everyone was always making an effort to move as possibly far away from his as they could manage. Oh well, less chances of him bumping into people. Walking into the ramen shop, he was instantly greeted with the strong, alluring aroma of ramen, his favorite dish yet. Naruto-chan, how are you today? Ayame greeted Naruto with a bright smile on her face. In return, Naruto gave a small smile of his own and made his way to his seat, the one right in the middle. The seat was fixed such a way that it could recline both upwards and downwards, making it easier for him to seat on it on his own. It was also dubbed as his, because of the ever-present layer of ice on the seat. Taking his seat and pushing it so that he could now clearly see the counter and Ayame in whole, Naruto took out the appropriate amount of money for his order and gave it to the girl. Naruto curiously tilted his head when he couldn't spot her father. "Two-san left the shop for a little while, so I'll be your chef today," Ayame brimmed, unknowingly answering Naruto's question. Her smile dropped a bit when she noted something missing with Naruto. "Where's your cute girlfriend? You two are always together when you come here." She was mad, Naruto said simply. He broke the chopsticks apart and Mudhend dug into the steamy bowl of ramen. "She left and I decided it was best give her space to cool off," he finished off. Ayame gave him an odd stare. "What?" Naruto asked. "Sometimes I find it hard to believe you're actually 5 years old, so anyways, what was she angry about?" Naruto gave her a small shrug. "Nothing, Ma, it's okay if you don't want to tell me. She placed another bowl in front of him. How's been the academy by the way, made any new friends yet? It's not bad, just boring that's all, and I didn't make any new friends. He whispered out the last part to himself. Truthfully, most of the kids at the academy were too afraid of him. It seemed that their parents had already told them to stay away from him. Well, you'll make friends eventually, don't give up, Ayame encouraged him. Thank you for the ramen, Ayame, Naruto suddenly said. Getting off his stool, I'll see you again next time, he said, walking out. Bye, and I hope things work out between the two of you, Ayame shouted after. By the time Naruto got to his apartment, it was almost dark out. The sun was just about to set and the sky was golden red. The small boy entered his small empty house, turned on the lights and went to take a shower. A couple of minutes later, Naruto could be seen seating on his bed with his legs crossed under him. He removed the white hand gloves and placed them beside him. Pure white snow appeared in the palms of his open hands, twisting and turning until it formed into a little snow person no bigger than a thumb. Repeating the same process several times, Naruto was soon looking at a dozen or so of little people in front of him. Now just concentrate. His eyes narrowed in concentration, and a moment later, a dark purplish smoke seeped off the skin on his hands and flowed into the snow dolls. An almost magical phenomenon occurred. The smoke got absorbed into each of Naruto's creations, and the snow creations glowed an eerily purple before they each started to move as though they were alive. Seeing this, Naruto smiled. Hello again, Satsuki-chan, Ganryu-kun, and everyone. Tonight I'll finally get to do something about that village you all have been crying about. Snow gathered in his palms once more. Naruto stared at the scene in front of him with both interest and disgust. 3 older boys were taunting and pushing around a little girl who was crouched on the ground crying her eyes out. Ha 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 ha, what are you going to do, you pupilless freak? One of the bully laughed out. I bet you think you're too rich to talk us, another bully said, shoving the poor girl to the ground. No, I don't. No, I ha ha ha, so what? Now you can't even talk to us straight. You Hyuga think you're better than everybody else, don't you? Hey guys, how about we teach Princess here a lesson? Another suggested. Yeah, the 2 other boys enthused. The girl could only whimper. I think you boys have gone too far, a cold voice suddenly sounded, freezing all 4 children where they stood. Who said that? The leader of the trio stuttered out, taking an unconscious, fearful step back. The sound of footsteps approaching clearly rang in the small clearing as the silhouette of person approached. When the person finally became clear to view, all 3 boys had to double take at the sight of him. It was just a small kid wearing a black hooded jacket and brown cargo pants to match. He didn't look that much taller than the girl they were taunting. It's just a kid, one of the boys said, blinking. Hey, isn't it that freakish kid the Ka-san is always telling us to avoid? Well, what do you want, freak? Leave her alone, Naruto said lowly. Oh yeah? And what would you do if we don't, freak? The boy provoked him further. Almost immediately after he had said that, the temperature around them suddenly dropped. I said, alone? Naruto's voice was laced with pure malice as he said this. Ice started spreading from all around him, heading towards where the 4 kids were. The 3 bullies promptly took off, screaming in fear as they did so. As soon as the boys were out of sight, the temperature turned back to normal. The ice on the ground slowly disappeared until it couldn't be seen anymore. Naruto approached the girl he had saved and knelt down next to her. Are you okay? He gently asked. She slowly looked up at him, her eyes brimming with tears. The first thing that Naruto noticed about her was that she wasn't some random girl. No, she was in the same class as him. What was her name again? Hinata, Hinata. Nodding her slowly, the now identified Hinata looked at her savior and saw a white-haired, wickered boy with the deepest shade of blue eyes she had ever seen. Here, Naruto shoved something into the girl's face, a red something to be exact. Get away from Hinata-sama. A male voice suddenly shouted from behind the 2 kids. Faster than either of them could see, said man suddenly grabbed Naruto by the scruff of his jersey and with the ease of a seasoned warrior, threw Naruto away like a common rag doll. Ow no, Hinata, realizing what had happened, shouted out. No, Hinata-sama, that boy is dangerous. Come on, we have to go back to the Hyuga estate. Ao said seriously, grabbing the straggling girl by her wrist. No, please, he saw. Hinata tried to reason with him, but the man would have none of it. taking one last glance at where she had seen Naruto fly off into. Hinata was surprised to see that in place of Naruto, a heap of snow now remained. She looked around but found no traces of him, or where he had gone for that matter. Grabbing tightly the only remembrance of her savior, a red scarf, she silently thanked him and allowed her bodyguard to take her. XXX. A few days later. XXX. Hey Naruto, MHH. Guess what's going on next week? What? Oh come on, don't tell me you've forgotten already. Forget what? You're hopeless, you know that. Tenten gave him a disappointed look. It's my birthday, remember? I've been telling you about it since last month. Oh, was Naruto's immediate response. Honestly, he hadn't really forgotten her birthday, not like she would allow him to. He was just messing with her. It always amused him seeing her get worked up like this. Yeah, so anyways, my parents are throwing me a party and they said I could invite all my friends. Hearing this, Naruto couldn't help but frown. In all the time they had been friends, he had yet to meet her parents and was not planning to. He supposed it was because deep down he knew that one look at who he was, and Tenten's parents would condemn their friendship, much like every other parent had done with their own children. Well, that's good, Naruto said somberly, not picking up the sad tone of her friend. Tenten continued. Now, I hope you know that everyone is supposed to bring a gift, Tenten hinted to Naruto. Naruto said offhandedly. And it better be a good one too. Yeah, it will. Naruto waved her off. A kunai materialized in his hand. You said you were going to show me that new move you've been working on today. Tenten grinned. I did say that, didn't I? He sit down and prepared to be amazed by the awesome abilities of the best kunoichi in the village. But first, mind giving me a couple of kunai? I keep losing mine and Tu-san refused to get me new ones for a little while as punishment. Naruto shrugged his shoulders and started creating as many kunai as she would need. Thanks, she took the 8 kunai and placed each one in the spaces between her fingers. The girl suddenly took off towards the 3 wooden stumps in the training ground, and when she was halfway there, she jumped high into the air, spinning. The kunai were thrown with deadly accuracy. All Naruto saw were flashes of light before they made contact with the 3 stumps. Not a single one missed. Tenten landed on the ground with a proud smile on her face. 2 months, that's how long it had taken her. 2 whole months of endless practice to be able to do that. And the move wasn't even complete yet. She was hoping for one day to incorporate more weapons into the move. A lot more weapons. So, what do you think? What do you call it? That was the coolest thing he had ever seen his friend do. It certainly showed how much more accurate she was getting with throwing kunai. When he first met her she was good, but back then she used to miss her targets here and there. Now though, it was almost rare to see her miss anything at all. Tenten hummed to herself a bit. A name, she hadn't really thought of what to call her new move. Oh well, it was her move, she would come up with a new name for it eventually. I don't have a name for it right now, but I will eventually. Taking hold of his gloved hand, she dragged him with her. But I've had enough of training for today, let's go have some real fun. Tenten, I don't really think this such a good idea. Come on Naruto, don't be such a spoil spot. You said your ice doesn't break, right? Well, not that I've seen. Great, then we have nothing to worry about. Last one to the bottom is a rotten egg. Woohoo. A few seconds later Naruto heard the resulting splash, signifying that Tenten had reached the end of the slide. Somehow Tenten had convinced him to create a slide, made purely out of ice. The task wasn't all that difficult, seeing that all he had to do was imagine what he wanted and his powers would do the rest for him. Tenten had, again, convinced him make it as tall as a tree, and so against his better judgment he had done it. The task had been slightly tiring. He had never created something so big in his entire life, but seeing his friend smile like that had been all that much more rewarding. Those thoughts, however, were now thrown out of the window as he looked at the winding and twisting slide in front of him. Why had he made it so dangerous looking again? Amazing, oh yes, Tenten said. Girl was already on her way up the slide to go at it again. If I get up there and you're still there, I'm going to push you, Tenten threatened. Naruto had no doubt in his mind she would. Gulping, Naruto pushed himself down the slide. To the outside observer the trip was fast and quick, to Naruto however it lasted far longer than that. Every twist and turn was felt. It was both scary and exciting. Far too quickly for his liking, he soon saw the water waiting for him at the end. Smack! Naruto bounced off the water as though he had hit solid ground. He skidded a good distance away before coming to a stop atop the surface of the water. Naruto! Tenten's cry made him stir. Looking behind him, Naruto saw Tenten diving in the water heading towards where he was. He blinked slightly when he noticed a trail of ice coming from where the slide ended to where he was currently seated. Looking down, he saw that sure enough, there was an ice platform around him. Well, that sucked. It seemed as though his powers had acted without his meaning to again and had frozen the water before he got into it. Tenten soon arrived next to where Naruto was, panting quite hard. "Are you okay?" she asked him worriedly. She had seen how hard hit the water, and it looked really painful, especially because he hit it face first. Naruto created a similar platform for her to stand on too. "Yeah," Naruto said after she had gotten settled out of the water and onto the ice platform. "What was that? I mean, why did you freeze the water? Were you afraid of getting wet or something?" Tenten bombarded him. Naruto shook his head. "No, I'm not sure what happened either." He stood up from his position. "I'm feeling tired, can we play again tomorrow?" "Ah, sure," Tenten said sadly. "That was exactly 1 week ago. Tonight was the party and Naruto had absolutely no idea what to give his over-exuberant friend. He had tried. Kami knows he had tried. To tell her that he couldn't come to her party. A few good pouts, a teardrop here and there, and he was cornered into going. Today he had decided against going to the academy, something he knew the old man would reprimand him for, but he had his reasons. Today was taijutsu practice day. Now, for any normal academy student this wouldn't have been a cause for one to be absent, but then again he was anything but normal. Freezing people by mere touch didn't really make him the most desirable student to teach, especially over something that required a lot of physical contact with the teacher. Sad to say, at this point he had all but missed every taijutsu class since he started the academy, again something the old man would not be happy about. So now he had the whole day to think up of a good gift for his friend. How difficult could it be? XXX 3 hours later, XXX 3 hours of fruitless searching, going through countless stores and getting kicked out of a good portion of said shops later, and Naruto was starting to realize that perhaps finding the gift wasn't as easy as it first appeared. Money was not the issue here, far from it actually. Problem was Tenten herself. She wasn't into girly stuff. Like the other girls her age, her words, not his. And she wanted something cool and sharp looking, again, her words not his. Add on to that, he was only 5 years old, and with the wisdom of a 5-year-old, regardless of how much more mature he may have acted, there really weren't that many ideas jumping into his mind. He had already exhausted every cool and sharp looking objects he could think of. Kunai? She had those by the dozens. Swords? Pretty much every day he saw her she was spotting on a new set of sharp knives, swords, etc. Maybe he could just treat her to an all-you-can ramen date. He would definitely love it if someone was to treat him to that. But then again, Tenten wasn't so much into ramen as he was, so that idea was out. A metal glint in the corner of his eye drew Naruto from his thoughts, turning to look at the object. Naruto saw it was a piece of jewelry on the display window of a shop to his right. Interested, Naruto took a few steps towards the window and was soon looking at a very expensive-looking necklace with shiny small stones all around. The middle piece, a rather odd-looking green gem, was breathtaking. Never in his life had he seen such an exquisite piece of jewelry that no amount of words could ever begin to describe how amazing it was. It was with something Tenten would hate. Sighing, Naruto took a step away from the display window and went back to his aimless searching for the right store with the right gift. By midday Naruto had all but given up. He had searched for hours, gone through several stores and still, nothing ever caught his attention. No gift for his friend whatsoever. Really now, this was starting to get on his nerves. Grr! The sound of his stomach grumbling was Naruto's indication to halt his search and indulge himself in a quick fix. A couple of bowls of ramen or so would suffice. And so, with a new destination set in mind, Naruto turned around and was soon on his way. Fortunately for him, he hadn't wandered too far from he lived, and so he knew his way back without any issues. Ho ho ho, well, if it isn't my favorite customer, what will it be this time, Naruto-kun? Tucci said pleasantly, already in the process of making the dish he knew the boy would order. Hello Tucci-san. 1 bowl of miso ramen please. Naruto ordered after setting himself on his stool. Right away. Not too long after the steaming bowl of heaven was placed in front of the boy. Muttering a quick silent prayer, Naruto made quick work of the food only to have another placed in front of him. By now Tucci knew for certain that one bowl of ramen wouldn't fill Naruto. It took a good 3 or 4 bowls to do that. And on his best day, even 7. How something so small could eat so much was beyond him. "It's a bit early for you to be out of school, don't you think?" Tucci said curiously. As far as he knew, the academy was supposed to end at 3 p.m. for Naruto's age group and at 4 for the rest. Right now it was barely past 12. "Mayoki-sensei was sick today. They said we could go early today," Naruto responded back with a small shrug of his shoulders. Not picking up the small fib in his statement, Tucci accepted the response and went back to preparatory. Was a comfortable silence in the shop as the only 2 occupants went about with their own business, one eating and the other preparing his next dish. "I heard today's your friend's birthday," Tucci started, breaking the silence. Naruto looked up from his dish and nodded his head. She seemed rather excited about it. Another nod, "Especially because you are going at her party." A hesitant nod. "You did get her a gift, right?" At this Naruto's shoulders slumped. He looked down at his half-eaten bowl and slowly shook his head. "Having trouble finding a gift for the little miss?" Tucci asked knowingly. He too had been in this very situation, on numerous occasions actually. What, with a Yame demanding a different gift from him every year, it wasn't always easy finding the right one every time. "You want to hear a little advice from an old man?" Naruto looked up at the ramen chef with hope clearly written on his face. "Poor soul. So young and you're already being subjected to this type of hell. As long as your gift comes from here," he pointed at his heart, "then she'll love it." Looking down at his chest, Naruto grew confused. "From my chest?" Tiaochi could only laugh at his innocence. "Ha ha ha ha, no, not your chest, your heart." "My heart?" Naruto parroted, still not getting just how he was supposed to produce a gift from his heart. Now it was Tucci's time to get confused. This wasn't going the way he had hoped it would. Now how was he to explain to a 5-year-old the figurative meaning of giving someone something from the heart? Not necessarily your heart per se. I mean, as long as your gift is both honest and sincere, she will love it. "Oh, I think I get it now. Thank you, Tucci-san. I know what to get her now," the boy squeaked out, jumping off his stool. "Anytime," Tucci waved him out as he left. Avery nervous Naruto stood in front of a normal-looking brown door with a normal-looking handle to boot. Gulping, he raised a single gloved hand and knocked on the door. Almost immediately, he heard the all-too-familiar voice of Tenten responding back. "Coming." A few seconds later and the door were swiftly opened by said girl. She was wearing a cute pink kimono with red roses decorated all around it. Her hair was undone from its usual 4 buns. The girl frowned when she noticed that nobody was at the door. She was about to close door when she noted something peculiar on the doorstep. Kneeling down and picking up the object, a box with a paper neatly folded on top, she unraveled the paper, which was actually a ladder. "Happy birthday, Nato," she giggled at the fact that he had even spelled his own name wrong. Folding the paper, Tenten opened the box, her eyes widened slightly at what she saw inside. It was beautiful. Tenten pocketed the items and ran back inside her house. A few moments later she came out flying through the door, taking off towards where she hoped her friend was. Looking for Naruto at night was like searching for a white mouse in a dark room. Just look for the small white object moving about and you've got him. With his whiter than normal hair, Naruto was easily the easiest person to find at night. Tenten finally found her friend resting on the rooftop of his apartment complex, gazing at the night sky with an expressionless look on his face. It took almost everything she had to not kick him in the ribs for missing her party. Out of everyone there, she was hoping he would be the one to show up, and here he was doing nothing but looking at the stars. "You might as well come out, I know you're there." Tenten almost jumped in surprise at how easily he caught her. Normally he wasn't able to sense where she was until she reviled herself. Walking until she stood beside him, Tenten wordlessly set herself down. There was an awkward silence around the 2 kids. "I wanted to say thanks for the gift. I love it," Tenten suddenly said. Naruto arched an eyebrow at her odd behavior. He had been expecting her to be fuming at him for missing her party. "Sorry I couldn't make it to your party today." There was a small pause before Tenten responded back. It's okay, besides I wanted to give you my own gift in private. Here, close your eyes for a second. Not wanting to make her angry and partly curious as to what gift she would give him, Naruto complied with her request. He heard her shuffle a bit and then, something warm pressed gently against his cheek. His eyes, which had been closely shut, snapped open with such a force it was a wonder they didn't burst. Looking up to his companion, he saw a very red-in-the-face Tenten smiling down at him. She kissed him. No, for a moment it seemed as though nothing would happen. That touching his skin wouldn't freeze his best friend into a block of ice. For a second he relished in the fact that he had received a kiss from a girl, his very first kiss. And then the color drained from her face. No, the end. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.